Good evening, listeners and viewers, and welcome back to a special youth edition of DMs with PM. As per usual, we would like to thank our radio stations who make this series possible. We would like to thank Power FM, Star FM, We FM, GBN, Fusion FM, Vibes FM, and GIS. We also extend a warm welcome to those of you tuning in to Facebook and YouTube Live. Don't forget to call at 423-3104 to direct your questions to the Honorable Prime Minister. I am Tariq Miller, and this is
Shiloh Alexander. Thank you, Tariq. Hey, what is one thing that nobody knows about you?
I would say I sometimes make mental notes of people based on their vibes and not really their names.
What were my vibes the first time you met me?
I would say very Bridgerton style, you know.
Oh, so
Yes,
classy.
yes,
I love it.
classy.
I love it.
Right.
I love it. What about you, Prime Minister? What is one thing that nobody knows about you?
But if I told you, then everybody would know.
Yeah.
You know what? That's a good answer.
Yeah, so maybe I can skip this one and then we can decide later on.
You know what? I'm gonna let it slide for now. I'm gonna let it slide.
Okay.
Okay, so how are you feeling today after such an exciting weekend of independence celebrations?
I'm feeling good. I just came from St. Patrick, all the way in Leverus. So it was a quick hour and 15 minutes up, hour and 15 minutes back to get here in time for the show. The developer was marking the anniversary, if I may put it this way, of having the 17th tower of the hotel complex that has been built, Tower 1, topped off, meaning they've reached the top floor. So it's 17 floors up. It's the highest building by some stretch in Grenada. So I went up for that and then drove back down in time for the show. So in the Chinese calendar, it's called the Year of the Horse, the Year of Vitality. So I hope for 2026 that we're all vital, full of vitality,
Amen.
energy, and ready to go.
Amen. From your mouth to God's ears.
Yes.
So, thank you, Prime Minister. Now, independence celebrations are wrapping up, but they have been overshadowed by the death of Alexandra Lett, who was brutally murdered by a repeated offender. There is a public outcry for citizens to be informed when violent criminals are released from prison, policy reform, a sex offender registry, and stiffer penalties for perpetrators. Are there any plans for such law amendments? And really, what is the way forward?
Well, first let me start by extending my personal condolences and empathy to the family. No parent, no brother, no sister, no village, no community should have to experience the horrific feeling of having a young lady so brutally murdered. So I think the starting point is to recognize that I'm sure the family, the community is still in shock, still in pain. We expect that there will be a candlelight vigil tomorrow in the community to show support for the family, and certainly from the Ministry of Social and Community Development, from Senator David Andrew, who's the party's caretaker in the community, from myself, and many others. We will continue to support the family. So I think this is the first thing that I want to say. This is my first public comment on this issue, and I partly because when a family is going through such a terrible incident, it's difficult to even know what to say, because nothing can bring back, obviously, the loved one, and especially when you lose a loved one in this sort of a horrific and terrible tragedy. So again, I think my thoughts and prayers are with the family. In terms of the initiatives that you've talked about, in a broad sense, the government supports that, and part of our reform efforts, particularly in relation to domestic violence or gender-based violence against particularly women and girls, but there's also a broader gender-based violence issue and violence in Grenada in general. A lot of the policy and legislative reform that we've been embarking upon, some of which are controversial, are in fact designed to try and address a lot of the challenges we face with violence, whether it's gender-based or whether it's just random violence. And the challenge with stiffer laws is that it's coming too late. If yes, you want stiffer laws, yes, you want the sex offenders registry, yes, you want knowledge of when someone is being released from prison, especially if they have a violent past, for the community to be informed and to be vigilant. But the reality is we need to spend more emphasis on making sure we don't have violent people, that the socialization, that the values that are placed in us at an early enough age allows us to have the tools, the skill set to be able to manage our anger, to be able to ensure that, particularly on the gender-based side of things, that men in particular don't see women as a thing, as an object, or in a purely sexualized manner that leads to a lot of the challenges that we face. So this requires a whole of community, whole of nation, whole of education approach to how we address a lot of the underlying cultural behaviors that in some instances tacitly accept violence, right, and violent behavior. And so we have to ensure that we don't just get emotional and have feelings of outrage when something horrific happens, because this is not the first time. And then we go back to doing nothing and living our lives and continue accepting a lot of the cultural behaviors that leads to that. So yes, all of the initiatives that you mentioned will help, but they're all, in a sense, after the fact. Okay. And I think greater emphasis has to be placed on ensuring that we don't get to a point where a young man could spend, if it is true, because I still have not been factually briefed on the alleged perpetrator's background, where if someone spends an extended period of time in prison, and then within a short period of them coming back into the community, they repeat offend, then obviously it means in that sense there's no rehabilitation taking place. And sometimes you have to accept people are beyond rehabilitation, in which case they need to be locked up to protect the public for extended periods of time. And we have to also begin, I think, to recognize that we have to pay more attention to the fact that a large percentage of the crime that is conducted in Grenada is by repeat offenders, which means either the rehabilitation services are not adequate, or you may have to accept the cold reality that you're not going to be able to rehabilitate them. And in those circumstances, then the key thing is to protect the public from them.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question so honestly, Prime Minister. We will now head to a commercial break. We'll be right back.
It's like the water pure and clean. It's a comfort anytime you need it. It's for everybody, fresh and green. You can count on us, there's nothing like it. It's homegrown. It's island pure. It's homegrown.
Welcome back to DMs with PM. You know what, PM? I think it's time for an icebreaker. I'm going to put you in the hot seat. What do you think, Terry?
I second that.
So if you start to sweat a little, it's okay. Don't worry. I understand. I'll say a prompt, and you'll respond with the first word that comes to your mind that resonates with the prompt.
Okay, I will try to do my best.
One word for independence. Dum, 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 dum.
Hard work. That's 2 words, actually. Work.
Youth today.
Brilliant.
Fitness.
Health.
Mental health.
Support.
Grenadian creativity.
Or musicians.
You answered that perfectly. Speaking of which, we've all heard Jerrington's Grenada to the World. But for those of you who haven't, let's check out the music video.
One nation, 3 islands, one people, loving abundance, emancipation, revolution. We build, aspire as one, taking us higher. Grenada to the world, Grenada to the world. Everybody shouting. GND to the world. Big, we bad and we proud. Let me tell you about our Grenadian. Everyone is a neighbor. We're looking out for each other. Man, we grow in the culture. Let me tell you about 473. Job we felt like we family. Brazilian, brilliant, little but we lad. But let we celebrate.
So, Prime Minister, what are your thoughts on that masterful piece by Jerrington?
Well, no, first of all, the video is quite amazing. I was actually thinking his outfit could perhaps pass as a national outfit.
Yeah.
But I know there's a big debate about what should or shouldn't be our national outfit. So that's one of the things that our creatives have to get the nation to settle on so we can actually design and have an official national outfit. But I think all of the cultural pieces that you see from the jab to the Veko, all of that I think is reflective of the amazing culture that Grenada has to share with the world. So when we say 473 to the world, we want people to come and appreciate that there's a uniqueness that you can only find in this part of the world. So it's an amazing song, amazing video, and you see some of our favorite songs are in fact songs about Grenada. So it tells us that Grenada itself evokes the creativity in our musicians, in our creatives, in the writers, the video producers, the musicians. So I certainly want to continue encouraging them to sing songs about Grenada.
So, and I'm hearing that he is a PBC boy.
Well, that probably goes with the same.
You wake up as a masquerader for Carnival with 5 minutes to get ready. What accessory are you absolutely refusing to leave home without?
Well, if you're playing jab, you must have the oil. So that's
Right.
one. But if you're playing pretty mass, I'd probably say make sure you have sunblock because you're going to get burnt in the sun.
Well, I
Okay.
must say that you have excellent skin, Prime Minister.
Well, I try. I'll have to probably thank my grandmother and mother, and I guess I'll have to give my father credit too, lest he says I'm leaving him out. But no, I think, in a sense, how I look is purely a matter of luck, and I'm assuming good genes. So I met some students at the Independence Rally, and 2 boys asked me my age, and when I told them, they told me they thought I was 20.
Yeah.
At first I thought they were joking with me, but I realized they were actually serious. So thus far I'm blessed, so I'm grateful for that.
Well, Prime Minister, we know that practicing active citizenship is important because we are all accountable for the well-being of our society. During your speech at the independence celebrations on Saturday, you said, and I quote, "Independence is a pilgrimage, not a party. Every generation of Grenadians must relearn our independence in its own way. This generation's task is to sustain it through competence. But in order for us to make informed and competent decisions, we must first have the education on our civic responsibility to do so. What are the government's plans for building more awareness to make this information more accessible for young people? And I mean preteens and teens.
Right. Well, I think we can start first with the history of Grenada. If you don't understand how Grenada came about, the makeup of the population, the political, religious, economic road that it has walked, then essentially you wouldn't understand anything about what it means to be a Grenadian. And so I think the first thing is making sure that Grenadian history is taught not from the perspective of Christopher Columbus came and discovered Grenada, but from a more, what I call, worldview of the history of mankind in general. And I think that is important because the reality is that because the past of not just Grenada but most of the Caribbean has been largely written by Europeans or the British, to a large extent history has been taught from that view. So where we are today, our institutions were inherited from our colonial masters, our economic system was inherited from them, and in a sense the very way in which the country is structured. You have parliamentary democracy, you have 3 co-equal arms, the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. All of that, to a large extent, is as a result of our history. Some of it is good, some of it is not so good. And we have to ensure that that picture is told in its totality. And to that extent, that is why we've introduced the teaching of Grenadian history in our schools. Because when I went to school, I was taught, in a sense, a very limited perspective of what Grenadian history, which is largely surrounding colonization. And there's a heavy emphasis on the French and the British and the naming of the islands, etc., etc. And then after that, you have pretty much a huge gap. When you get to secondary schools, they teach you largely about slavery, the colonial empire, and then you get a little snippet about perhaps Crown colony rule and then independence. But even after independence, there's very little history taught, post-independence to current. And that is perhaps the most critical part of our history, I would say now, because it is the post-independence period that Grenadians would have had, in a sense, complete freedom to shape the country. Prior to that, most of the decisions were being made by persons outside of the country. You had an English governor, they can decide what they wanted. So now we have, post-independence, the opportunity to actually shape what happens to the country. And so teaching Grenadian history, I think, is the first aspect of what needs to happen. If that doesn't happen, it is difficult to ask people to have civic responsibility, because then they don't feel any commitment to the country itself. So I think that's one of the key things that has to happen. The second thing that has to happen is that it's important for us to understand that the issue of competence is critical. If we don't instill the right values in our citizens, and I would say particularly young people, what is going to happen is that the society will become incompetent. And when you become incompetent, you reopen the doors for you to be recolonized and for someone else to essentially take over the country. So if we don't become competent, meaning good at what we do, if we don't want to work, if we don't want to produce, then essentially you are dependent on someone else giving you something. And once people give you stuff and you don't have the ability to make it yourself, or produce it yourself, or produce enough to trade so that you can trade the things you have in excess and buy those things you have in short supply. These are very basic fundamental principles of economics. But what happens is that you become a dependent people. So even if you may be, quote unquote, politically independent, to a large extent you'll be dependent on others. And it doesn't have to be a country. You could actually find yourself in a situation where a few people could actually control the entire country. So I think from a civic perspective, we have to ensure that we instill in our citizens the understanding that the country is the collection of us, and that our common values will determine the success or failure of the country. So if you don't want to wake up early to go to work, and others are getting up early to go to work, they will succeed. If we don't want to be disciplined, those who are disciplined will succeed. If we don't want to moderate our behavior so that we don't have excessive consumption of alcohol or tobacco or drugs, then you simply will become dysfunctional and you'll not be able to perform. You'll not be able to be a functioning person. Then essentially someone else will have to take care of you. Most persons are not going to take care of you, and in those circumstances you will fail. And the more people we have becoming like that, is the more the society itself is going to fail. So I think when we say civic duty, we're not just talking here recite the pledge, have respect to the flag. We are talking basic things about not littering your country and teaching the right skill set. I drove by a school sports on my way down, and the sheer amount of garbage I saw where the kids were playing means clearly the idea of saying don't litter is clearly not being reinforced enough, because the bins are there, but right in the police pen itself, it's just scattered with litter. And that kind of says to me, this is the challenge we face. We have to, right from the get-go, say, whether it's sports, in outer sports, don't litter. And explain why it is important not to litter your environment. So that to me is what civic responsibility is. It's not the flag, it's not the coat of arms, it's not the pledge, it's not rain red, yellow and green when it's Independence Time, or painting the streets and so on. It's actually how we behave to make the country a better place. And I think we have to make sure we understand that, and we don't just think it's about respect to the flag or bowing or standing at attention when you see the flag, but actually living in a way that promotes the well-being of yourself first, and the well-being of the community and the well-being of the country.
Okay, and there's been ongoing public discussions about Grenada's constitutional future, and especially the role of the Governor General. How does your government view possible reforms to the head of state, and what principles such as national identity, democracy, and public consultation would guide any future decisions, especially with youth involvement?
Right, so this government actually doesn't have an official position on the issue. We did not make it an issue in our last campaign. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that attempts at constitutional reform were tried in the past and failed. And so I think we felt sometimes you have to respect the fact that the outcomes of political process, and in a sense a referendum is just that. But I think the starting point would have to be actually consultations and education. I mean, my personal view is that our government is too expensive. We're a small society, so we need to make government nimble. And too often, I think what we've inherited is too cumbersome and oftentimes too inflexible to actually deliver a lot of the services we need. So for me, there is no necessity for the office of the Governor General. It exists, and so we function within that. But essentially, there is nothing that the office of the Governor General does that can't be done otherwise. So, and you have to maintain the office of the Governor General. So I would certainly say that's one of the things. And I guess everybody takes the debate about republicanism versus monarchical type system of government. My own view is that we should have a government that is effective and that is efficient and is cost effective. So I don't see the need for having a ceremonial head of state and an executive head of state. To my mind, whoever is elected by the people as head of state should be the head of state, meaning the head of government as well. That's sort of what the American system is. They have an executive president. He's also the ceremonial president, so you don't have to pay for two offices. Most countries in the region have an executive head, and they still have a ceremonial head. So even when they call themselves a republic, like Trinidad and Tobago or Barbados or Dominica, you still have a ceremonial president who performs exactly the same functions as that of the Governor General. I don't see the point of that. But that's just my view, because I believe government should be as cheap as possible and not actually be expensive in terms of providing the services. But that would require, as I said, significant consultation, and I would say driven by the youth, because there's no form of government that's perfect. So we have to be constantly evaluating whether the system of government works for the country. And if it's not working for the country, in a sense, the group of persons who will feel it the most are young persons, because what you'll have is bad decisions on expensive government. And therefore, the only way to change that is to agitate for the change. So putting forward the ideas as to how to make government more efficient, more accountable, more responsive to the needs of the people, I think young people are best placed to advocate and to share their views on those issues. Because if you depend on old persons, they will just simply tell you about what they know and the system of government that they're used to.
Thank you, PM. And I agree with you. I believe that it's time for young people to start being at the forefront of national decisions. With that, we are going to head straight into the DMs.
Katie is asking, what concrete steps is your administration taking to ensure accountability is applied evenly so that civic responsibility is not only expected of citizens, but clearly demonstrated by those in positions of power?
Thank you, Katie. That's a very good question. So I think, so I can obviously only speak from the government's perspective, largely the executive. And I think the first thing is to recognize that there are, in fact, significant legislation in place that manages how government funds can be used and should be used. So everything from the Public Finance Management Act, the Procurement Act, you have things like the Integrity in Public Life Act and the Integrity Commission, all of which are designed to address or mitigate the risk of things like corruption, wastage, and in instances where there isn't what I would call value for money. Having said that, there are different tiers. There's obviously the politicians, the persons who sit in the cabinet room, and then you have the public servants. And to a large extent, most of what the government does is actually delivered through the public servants. While the politicians may make policy, the actual implementation is to the public servants. And I would say one way of actually securing accountability is making sure that our public servants are actually trained to do the jobs that they do. There's no point in complaining if we are not giving them the training and giving them the opportunities and the experience to ensure that they have the skill sets that are required to deliver on behalf of the public. And so that's one of the things that our government is keen to do and to encourage. And so whenever there are opportunities for public servants to be trained, to go on further education and study, we certainly do that. The introduction of technology and greater use of technology is one way of doing so. It makes the government a lot more efficient. So a simple example would be, if you wanted to pay your tax bill, traditionally you'd have to leave and go to a treasury office to do so. Now you can pay your tax bills online, anytime, anywhere. So just being able to give the public far efficient and cheaper services helps the public, and at the same time helps the government, because it increases the revenues that the government can collect, because people don't have to, if you can't get there between 8 to 4, and you can't pay it, then the government can't collect the revenue. So the use of technology, we think, is a significant one. The other advantage with technology is that it eliminates discretion. And unfortunately, when people have power, it means they have the ability to make decisions and to exercise the discretions often in ways that are arbitrary. So two persons may come for the same thing. They like one person, they help them faster. They don't like the other person, they make you see trouble. But if we can get to a position where a lot of these services actually, in a sense, being delivered through technology, then there's no discretion. So you don't have to worry about whether, if you show up at 5 minutes to 12, if the officer figures lunchtime and they put up, gone to lunch, your entire day is spoiled because you then have to come back. But with the technology, it's not going to say I'm out to lunch, or it's 5 to 4, I need to pack up to home. So greater use of technology, I think, is one of the areas that certainly will help with the accountability by public officers, as well as efficiency. And when things are happening, or you actually get good service from the public, then in turn the public trusts the politicians. So I think it's important for us to don't just see accountability from the point of view of no corruption or no wastage, but also we invest and improve in the technology and invest and ultimately make the public servants better at the jobs that they're doing.
Of course.
We have another one from Donna Joseph. Given that the death penalty remains part of the law, what actions will your government take to ensure that the individual responsible for the recent brutal murder is held fully accountable and that public safety is protected?
Thank you, Donna, for the question. I have to point out that the sentencing of persons is not something that my government has any control over in any meaningful or significant way. I mentioned earlier that there are three arms of the state. The judiciary is responsible for sentencing of persons after they've been convicted of criminal offenses. In our jurisprudence, it has evolved where the automatic imposition of a death sentence was ruled to be unconstitutional. And in fact, in recent memory, I do not know of any instance where someone has been sentenced to death in Grenada and perhaps even in the OECS and most of the wider Caribbean countries. That is a matter that only the judges can determine as to whether or not a particular crime warrants the death penalty. And so to some extent, I will almost say that by operation of case law, the death penalty itself has almost become unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. So while it may be written, I'm saying almost become because it's the automatic imposition that was ruled to be unconstitutional. So it leaves the room for saying that in particular circumstances, a judge may be of the view that the crime warrants an imposition of death. But real experience suggests that it's long sentences that are being imposed. Now, for that to change, it will require legislation that is beyond challenge. I'm saying beyond challenge here, as in that would have to stand the constitutionality test to allow for the imposition of the death penalty. And those are things that we can debate, right? Because at the end of the day, the debate as to whether one should have a death sentence is a matter in mind for the society to decide. And if the majority of the society favors it, then the representatives, i.e. the members of parliament, will then have to determine whether they go to parliament to pass law that is hopefully clear enough and strong enough that if someone tests it against the constitution, that the person that a law is able to stand up. The challenge with the death penalty is that in criminal cases there's always a risk, even if someone is convicted, that the person could be innocent. And in some countries, particularly the United States, where the judicial system itself, in many instances, were prejudiced and biased, and where prosecutors and so on would have colluded to literally send innocent people to jail. The danger with having a death penalty sentence is that once you kill the person, if they're innocent, there's no coming back. Now, so you have to counterbalance that risk against the public safety issues where you have someone who perhaps is beyond redemption, who's killed already, and whether you are prepared to run the risk of giving them a long sentence or giving them life in prison with the risk that once they're alive, they could always escape and potentially commit the crime again. So those are things that there has to be, in a sense, I think, wider discussion and consultations on. But it's important for the public to understand that the sentencing is not something the Prime Minister or any member of Cabinet has any role in. It is the High Court judges and it is the magistrates who are responsible for the sentences that are imposed on persons.
Listeners and viewers, we now move to our commercial break. We will be back.
My name is Dr. Abigail Noel, and I am the head of department at the Accident and Emergency Department. One thing I love about Mount Sinai is their spirit of collaboration. They came in with ideas that have transformed our department in real time. The implementation of ID bands for every patient that comes through the emergency department. That has decreased patient errors. They have implemented defibrillators on every ward. Thus far, 128 staff members have been trained in defibrillator use. The huddle system is basically small meeting with all team members. It improves communication between staff members as well as with patients. This transformation means everything to the emergency department and by extension the health system of Grenada.
Welcome back, and once again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll now take it out to the streets with Norris Students at Anglican High School and J.W. Fletcher Catholic Secondary School what question they'd ask the Prime Minister if they had the chance. Here's what they said.
Welcome.
Major political parties. In your perspective, how open is our democratic system to emerging political voices and organizations? And what role does political diversity play in maintaining a healthy and representative democracy?
Well, as luck would have it, today I was looking at the symbols of political parties under the Representation of the People's Act, and there were so many I lost count. So I think in the first case it says that we certainly have a history where we've had a diverse and large number of political parties. However, most of them have not been able to sustain their political activism. And what you find oftentimes is that around, say, an electoral cycle, you see new parties springing up or amalgamation of old parties, and then once the electoral process is over, they disappear. So I think that it's important to appreciate that, politics actually is a very demanding job, and that, like everything else, it's a career. But I think traditionally people have treated it as I would call it a bit of a sometime vocation, where when there's elections, people come and offer themselves to run, and if they don't actually win or get into office, then most of them would disappear. So what has happened is that, in a sense, the country, I guess, has settled into two broad political organizations, I would say, over the last 35 to 40 years, namely NNP and NDC. And you'd have smaller parties every now and then, certainly around the electoral cycle, offering themselves to serve. And for the most part, they have not been successful. And I think one of the reasons for that is that people tend not to want to support. Ultimately, the goal of a political party is to win an election, because if you can't win, you can't make public policy. And to that extent, I think people want to feel that if they're going to vote or support a political organization, you want to at least have a probabilistic chance that they will form the government and that they will be able to influence the policies that you want to see. And so if you have small political organizations that people don't think are likely to succeed, you'll probably see not many people, or them not being able to garner a lot of support to make it successful. So I think it's open, but the challenge is politics is very demanding, and it also is very resource intensive, both in terms of human capital and actual capital. And it's one of the things that nobody talks about. Where does a political party get its money from to just do basic things like keep an office open? It comes from donations, it comes from supporters. In some countries, the state actually pays or gives a contribution to political parties because it recognizes that the basis of the democracy is the political parties. And those are some of the things we can talk about if we truly want to talk about transforming the way our democracy works. So as it stands now, all political parties are out begging to raise funds to do the political work. The effect is, if you're not successful at begging, let's put it this way, or if you don't know how to beg, or if you can't convince people to fund you, it puts you at a significant disadvantage, even if you may have the better policies, because you are not likely to win. Because all of the electoral work that you need, even on an election day, to get people to volunteer, to get people to come out, to get people to transport people, to check the list, all of that, while you may have supporters who may be prepared to do it, even if it's just basic things like stipend and lunch, you have to be able to do those things. So I think the system allows people to come in. I mean, I'm a perfect example. I came from nowhere, and in a couple of months I was the political leader of the National Democratic Congress, and in a couple of months I was the Prime Minister of the country. But obviously it came through an established political organization, and there are many others who would have joined the party at the same time. And certainly my observation of the political landscape says there's a lot of new people who are now putting up their hand to get involved in politics, but I think most of them would probably do it through the mainstream parties because of the same issues that I identified earlier.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We apologize for the technical difficulties we were experiencing earlier. We'll see what the students have to say.
Welcome back to another amazing edition of DMs with PM. And today, we are on the streets, and we are going to two schools, J.W. Fletcher Catholic Secondary School and Anglican High School. let's listen to the future of our country.
My name is Adriel Burke. Mr. Prime Minister, what legacy do you hope your leadership will leave for the youth of Grenada?
Thank you, Adriel, for the question. I think two legacies: a better healthcare system and a better education system. Particularly for education, we want to ensure that technical, vocational, digital, creative education is mainstreamed into the education sector. That is critical, and that includes things like digital education and emerging technologies. And we have to make sure the education system is nimble and is always scanning the horizon so that things that are obsolete become obsolete, and new knowledge, new learning is adopted to suit the emerging trends and to suit the emerging realities of the societies that we live in. And clearly a healthcare system that first and foremost encourages us to take care of ourselves. So primary healthcare has to be the foundation upon which our healthcare system is done. We have to exercise, we have to eat healthier, and we have to engage in activities that promotes our mental well-being and our mental health. And then when it comes to the secondary and tertiary education, health system, a system that is robust enough and affordable enough that for most of our health needs, it can be performed or met in Grenada. Those are really the two legacies. I think if we leave that, then the young people will then be able to take care of themselves and take care of the nation.
My name is Joshua Williams James. Mr. Prime Minister, my question is there going to be any future changes to school uniforms and the way students dress? Like, for example, here, right? I feel like students should be allowed to express themselves in their hair, like growing out their hair, girls being able to put braids to come to school. And is there going to be a change to school uniforms? Because we live in a hot climate and wearing shirt and tie every day is kind of uncomfortable.
So thank you for the question. I'm smiling because, well, first, I didn't go to a high school or a primary school that required me to wear a tie, so I'm eternally grateful for the principals, teachers, and management of those schools who, I think, recognize that a sensible dress code is appropriate. But having said that, I think the uniform is to a large extent for the school. Each school has its own motto, its own ethos, its own culture, and I am not so sure that it's the Ministry of Education or the government's place to get that involved in the school to dictate whether or not they have the tie. But I would say as a youth advocate, you're obviously wearing a tie in your school. Maybe it's something you can raise with the principal, with the PTA to determine whether or not changes in the school uniform to suit the climate. And I went to school, so I understand how hot the classrooms are, and they're probably even hotter today. So I certainly think that's something that I think youth advocacy in a sensible way, in a constructive way, could be looked at. The issue of things like hairstyles and so on evokes a lot of debate and controversy. I was sent home quite often when I was in presentation college for my hairstyle. My son was sent home for his hairstyle. My own view is that, yes, a lot of this is majoring in minor, and sometimes people don't want to hear it, but there's also on the tone of our colonial past and our colonial history that assume decency looked a certain way. Having said that, I do appreciate, though, that there has to be within a school system some measure of uniformity, some measure of order, because as we would often say, you can't have the inmates running the asylum. So there has to be rules. The extent and how much leeway is given is something that I think certainly can be debated, and the school's management, the PTA, the students could perhaps engage in constructive discussions and find a happy medium. I certainly know that the Ministry of Education's policy that students should not be sent home because of their hairstyle, particularly this whole issue of boys and their hair not being cut and so on. Notwithstanding that, I know many schools still send kids home. I do not support that, because my own view is a child's education, even one day where a child loses the access to education, pales in comparison with the issue of a hairstyle. And the child obviously isn't there permanently, they're passing through to become an adult. But I also do recognize that you don't want it to get outrageous in terms of things like hairstyles and nails and those kinds of things. So obviously we have to find the happy medium. So I would certainly say, from how you engineer sensible compromise and change, is that I think parents, students, PTA organizations can certainly engage in some of those discussions, and at the school level they can make the appropriate compromise or adjustments.
And we have another question.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I am Nala Sam of 4A of the Anglican High School. Knowing your legal background, what principles are you going to establish to fight against the rise of sexual assault?
Well, thank you. I think we touched on this a bit earlier in the show, and although I have a legal background, yes, we can certainly strengthen a lot of the legislation, and we are already doing so. Significant changes are being made to the domestic violence legislation, to the possibility of things like the sex registers offenders. The Spotlight Initiative is actually designed to address a lot of those issues, including, you see, there is, in a sense, stranger violence, where a stranger may assault someone sexually, and there is intimate partner or domestic violence, sexual assaults or incest, where the victim and the perpetrator know each other. They're in some sort of relationship, whether they live together, whether they are family members, etc. This part in particular is quite prevalent. And so a lot of it requires us to, again, engage in the type of education and values, behavioral change, to actually ensure that we don't have a situation where men in particular, because largely men who are the perpetrators, think it is normal and acceptable behavior to engage in violence, first of all, and then sexual violence against women and children. And if we don't change that, if we don't educate men in terms of how we socialize them, you know, and we had a discussion about, this may sound controversial, a lot of our schools are still unisex, boys only, girls only. So in many instances, boys and girls, unless they're in some other youth group, oftentimes don't get the opportunity to interact or socialize until they're probably 16 or 17 or 18 years, either at TAMCC level or in some other environment. And the question we have to ask ourselves, if that is the way in which we continue with our education system, are we putting both boys and girls in a position where they don't even know how to relate to each other? Because they have not had the opportunity from as early as possible to see each other as normal, as another human being, and not view each other through sexual lens, especially at a time when their hormones are raging and they're now beginning to try and understand themselves. So these are some of the issues that we have to be able to talk about in an open and honest manner, if we are going to be able to tackle some of those issues that is facing Grenada. Grenada has some of the highest rates of sexual offenses in the world. If you look at their sizes, the criminal sizes, you would see they are dominated by sexual and sex-related offenses, right? We have some of the highest rates of domestic violence in the world. So while many times people may talk about the police and so on, it's already too late. And usually, it's by the time it does get to the police, they would have had multiple incidents where this is happening. And so you find a situation where as early as 14 or 15 boys, some boys, think it is okay to respond with violence to any situation that doesn't meet their approval, or where they feel they're threatened or angry and so on. And that is the challenge that we're facing. That is the challenge that we have to be able to address. And that's compounded by the excessive presence of alcohol and other drugs and so on that we meet the challenge with. So it's important for us to appreciate that it is not just the legislative response. It is the whole of society response that we need. It is the education, it is the values, it is the understanding that if we don't teach about sex and sexuality in schools and so on, then we are never going to break the back of this issue, and it is probably going to get worse.
We now move for our final question.
Well, welcome to DMs on the Streets.
Thank you.
My name is Norris Francois. What's your name?
My name is Amaya Charles, head girl of the school.
All right. Ask your question to the Prime Minister.
My question to the Prime Minister is, as a resident of the Wester Hall, St. David's Parish, it is very hard to get buses in the mornings and in the afternoons, and students have to physically fight to get into the bus. What are the plans that have been put in place to address this transportation issue? That's my question.
All right, thank you, Head Girl, for the question. So we are still at the very early stage of tackling this issue. As you may be aware, we did have a school bus pilot that was run by the Transport Commission during 2025. The reason for doing a pilot was for us to see what are the solutions that we could put in place to address, particularly for schools, the challenge with transportation. We should be getting the results of the pilot soon, and that would put us in a position to then begin to inform the policy that we need to adopt. I would also point out that we are encouraging and supporting the current bus drivers to form themselves into a single cohesive corporation, so that the government is in a better position to treat with them, so that we could begin to address the deficits that exist in the transportation system. It is not something that's going to be solved overnight. The third thing that we are looking at is the importation of electric and or hybrid buses. We're working with some of our partners to see if we could get significant quantities of those. And once they arrive on the island, then we'll be able to make decisions. Well, I shouldn't say once they arrive, but prior to that, we should be in a position to then announce what would be the approach we will take to beginning to address, even if it's just at the school level, the significant shortage of buses that are available at the times that they are needed, particularly for school children. So I would say let's stay tuned. Once we have the results of the pilot, we will be able to then come back to the public to give an update as to what the likely course of action will be specifically to school children.
Incoming another commercial break, and we'll be right back with live callers.
My name is Dr. Abigail Noel, and I am the head of department at the Accident and Emergency Department. One thing I love about Mount Sinai is their spirit of collaboration. They came in with ideas that have transformed our department in real time. The implementation of ID bands for every patient that comes through the emergency department. That has decreased patient errors. They have implemented defibrillators on every ward. Thus far, 128 staff members have been trained in defibrillator use. The huddle system is basically small meeting with all team members. It improves communication between staff members as well as with patients. This transformation means everything to the emergency department and by extension, the health system of Grenada.
We now open up our phone lines. Remember to call at 423-3104. That's the number, 423-3104. So, Prime Minister, important is mental health. As you know, our country and Grenada and youths of today are suffering with mental health. What guardrails is the Ministry of Mental Health and the government of Grenada putting in place to come against this Gordian knot?
Well, thank you for the question. I almost feel I'm going to have to read the response out because the Ministry of Mental Health has been engaged in a lot of initiatives to address the mental health issue that we face in Grenada. So I want to make sure that I can give accurate information about some of the things that the ministry is doing so that the public is aware, because I think sometimes perhaps we may not be blowing our trumpets loud enough. But this is just a long list of some of the things. There is community-based mental health services that are available, and access has been expanded to clinics across the parishes. There are early intervention programs currently. There are screening and referral services in schools, workplaces and communities. There is support for at-risk groups, particularly young people and elderly. We've also engaged in significant public awareness and education campaigns, national campaigns to reduce stigma around mental health. One of the issues that we recognize even in the existing legislation is the fact that suicide is a crime, but who's the victim, right? And ensuring that we can address the changes in the legislation on those issues, because presumably if you attempted suicide but you survived it, you're not going to arrest yourself, of course, or go to the police to complain. So again, it goes back to the attitude towards mental health. That is one of the issues we're trying to address. Training of healthcare workers to identify and respond to mental health issues is one of the things we're giving. And then support for families and caregivers. There are guidance and counseling and support groups for families of those who are impacted. At schools, there's counseling available for students, teachers, and staff to support mental health and well-being. And in workplaces, access to counseling services for employees to promote mental wellness. And at the community level, there's counseling and support services provided at the community level for all residents. So one of the things that we are trying to particularly focus on is making sure that the clinics themselves, that persons can have support for mental health, because I think traditionally the pattern has been as soon as someone thinks that someone has a mental health issue, they get sent on to the psychiatric hospital in Mongay. And depending on what the person is dealing with, that's probably the last place they need to be. And that's usually for extreme cases. So we want to make sure that at the primary healthcare, that's the medical stations and the health centers, that health practitioners, particularly nurses and so on, can spot where persons may need some mental health support. And the ministry also has mental health community nurses, again, to reduce the stigma of you having to go into a particular clinic where people feel it's only for persons who suffer from mental health. So those are some of the initiatives that the ministry is currently working on. I know from time to time as well, there are opportunities for persons to have anonymous counseling services, because again, that's one of the issues that we are looking at. Finally, a lot of the mental health challenges are triggered by substance abuse. We are currently in the process of commencing work to build a substance abuse rehabilitation center in Maribor, in St. Andrews. So this is one of the key things that we really will also help for us to be able to treat persons with substance abuses who then are often prone to breakdown in their mental health.
Okay. It seems we have a caller on the line. Hello, caller.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening. Please, if you could keep your question brief.
Yes. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is there any possibility that the government is thinking about including on the ballot paper, because I know election is very close, any issues of national importance that the public can be able to make a referendum on, still when a step going and vote for a particular candidate? Thank you.
Well, the short answer is no. There are no current issues that we are contemplating putting on the ballot paper for a referendum. And I think while that's possible, it would have to be something that actually requires a referendum. If it doesn't require a referendum, then essentially Parliament, whoever has a majority in Parliament, can pass the necessary legislation to effect the change that needs to happen.
All right, next caller.
Good evening, caller. Go right ahead.
Oh, good evening, Prime Minister. Can you clarify the current rules on citizenship by descent? I want to find out if Grenadian citizenship can be gained by the grandchildren of born Grenadians, or is this limited to children only? Thank you.
The current rule is limited to children only. We are currently studying a draft policy to determine whether it should be extended to grandchildren. But the current rule is limited to children only.
Next caller. You can go right ahead.
So, Prime Minister, synonymous with the...
Harry, go that one.
Hello?
Hello, caller.
Hello,
You can
caller.
go ahead. We hear you.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, I want to touch on an issue. Although you raised it earlier this afternoon, this evening in your presentation, that is the going wireless, paperless. I compliment the government on the issue. My issue is the way it's been done.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. I'm hearing you.
Yes, my issue is the way it's been done. I believe such an approach should have been evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Because when you're thinking about income tax and property tax, the majority of people paying property tax are senior people who are not au fait with the IT system. So to just implement it, I believe there should be a dual approach for the time being. And the second issue is that the government, because you ask the question, what method, what approach has been done before you implement that? To implement it, the government should have used the community centers, the schools, and have programs that are trained people in IT and computer science and technology, rather than just implementing a program like that. In the interest of time, I'll stop you, but I'd like to hear from another.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, first, it's important to point out that the normal means for paying taxes still exist. All citizens can still go into the Treasury offices, the district revenue offices, and pay for taxes as normal. So that continues and it remains. So it's important for me to emphasize that when it comes to payment for taxes. So that is ongoing. A senior citizen, if they still wish to pay for their taxes the traditional way, they can continue doing so. So there's no impact to that. And the change over to payment of other government taxes online has in fact been gradual. It's something that has been going on for quite a while. A new software, if I may use that term, would have been introduced called GTax, which is what currently is being used. But that doesn't replace the normal over-the-counter transactions that is happening. The caller didn't say it, but I suspect he may be speaking about a system which speaks to suppliers, not taxes, but suppliers, that is persons who supply goods or services to the government, which requires you to now, in a sense, have all of your data entered in the government's, I will use the word simply to say government supplier database to ensure that the payments can be processed. The challenge, and I take, if that's what the caller is referring to, if the criticism is that they didn't think sufficient education and so on, or sufficient time was given to notify people of the change, I will accept the comments, and certainly I think the team at the Accountant General's office and the Ministry of Finance will continue to educate the public on it. But it's important for us to appreciate that, as the government is dealing with suppliers, we also have to find ways to become more efficient. And one of it is ensuring that all our suppliers are in the database so that we can process their payments easily. Because once we have the information entered once, we don't have to enter it again. And under the current systems, that's one of the issues we have. We have multiple entries sometimes, simple things like errors. And I'll give a good example. If someone gives us, writes their bank account out for the government to transfer money to the bank account as a means of paying them, and the one number is wrong, or the way it's written, the person from the government side doesn't understand it, and you pay that money, it's going to be lost. As in, you then have to try and trace where this money went, because the supplier is going to say it's not in my account. Then whose account is in it? Obviously, a wrong number was given, and then you end up with a lot of delays and challenges. So the whole idea of the system is that once your information is entered correctly and entered once, then it's there permanently, and it allows the government then to facilitate your payments and so on a lot faster. So that's one of the main reasons for ensuring that we have such a system. The other thing that is also important to appreciate is that the government issues millions and millions of dollars worth of contracts to all kinds of suppliers, and many of these suppliers turn around and don't pay any taxes, right? And yet still they continue to benefit from government contracts and so on. And if the government doesn't collect taxes and revenue, in turn it can't issue the contracts, and in turn it can't provide the other services that is required. So we also have to make sure that our suppliers and so on are also tax compliant. If they have to continue getting government contracts and so on. And again, having all of the relevant information, making sure that their NIS registration, they have their TIN number, all of these things are designed to actually help them as well to become more sophisticated business people and suppliers. Because as you go forward, again, if you have all of that information and you want to get a bank loan, it makes it easier. You can take your records with your government payments and so on and be able to take that to the bank and say, look, I have a government contract, this is how I'm paid, etc. If you don't have that and it's being done manually, and then the government gives you a check and you don't record you got the check and so on, you have no financial records, you can't even go to a bank or credit union to prove your source of income and so on. So yes, there will be some initial hiccups, and whenever there's a adoption of new technology or change, you'll find these challenges, but we believe they will be smoothed out, and in the long run it will actually benefit the suppliers because it's also a means of helping them with their own record keeping.
We will now have our final update from Grenada Christian Academy.
Hello, Grenada, and a special greeting to the students, staff, and members of the Grenada Christian Academy family. Today, the Ministry of Infrastructure is pleased to bring you this important update on the ongoing construction of your new school under the Caribbean Development Bank Grenada Enhancement Project Phase 2. Construction of the new Grenada Christian Academy is taking place on a 1.5-acre site in Pearl St. Andrew. The design features 4 spacious 3-story blocks, strategically positioned around an indoor hard court with a playing field located at the southern end of the property. This modern facility will not only double the school's current capacity, but will also provide a strong, resilient, and inclusive learning environment for every student, complete with provisions for full accessibility for persons with mobility challenges. One of the most distinguishing features is its integration of both academic and technical vocational training. The building will house 11 classrooms, science laboratories, food and nutrition, clothing and textile and home management labs, electricity and electrical technology rooms, auto mechanics and small engine repair workshops, and of course, building technology spaces. This expanded technical capacity means the facility will function not only as a secondary school, but also as a center for skills training, creating opportunities for young people to explore trades, develop practical competencies, and to prepare for careers in high-demand sectors. Work on the new Grenada Christian Academy began in April 2024. The project is valued at $27.4 million, representing a significant investment in the future of our youth and the wider community. Despite encountering delays related to global supply chain disruptions, inclement weather, and labor shortages, the project continues to progress steadily and remains within budget. Completion is expected in April 2026, allowing for a smooth transition in time for the academic year beginning in September. Here's where the project stands today. Earthworks are 100% completed. Structural concrete and masonry, approximately 90% completed. Upcoming works are final finishing stages, including plastering, electrical installations, and plumbing installations. The Ministry of Infrastructure, alongside its construction and engineering partners, continues to monitor progress closely to ensure the project meets the highest standards of safety, durability, and educational functionality. To the students, teachers, and staff of the Grenada Christian Academy who continue to demonstrate resilience and patience, we thank you. Your new school is well on its way and promises to be a place where learning, creativity, and personal growth can thrive. The Government of Grenada, through the Ministry of Infrastructure, is committed to delivering a facility that reflects our Vision 75, ensuring that our students are equipped with the necessary skills and that education is accessible, high quality, and future ready. We look forward to bringing you more updates as we move closer to the completion of this transformative project.
It is said that all good things must come to an end. But before we come to an end, we would first like to thank you, our loyal listeners and viewers, those of you who have been tuning in to DMs with PM for quite a while, and for our sponsors, our radio stations, for bringing this episode to you. We move forward to the Prime Minister for his closing remarks.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on the show with both of you. You've done the young people of Grenada proud, and it's an example of the type of empowerment that we need. There's no reason why shows like this should not be hosted by young people, so that you bring your perspective, you share your views, your experience, and your aspirations. So I feel quite privileged that I had the honor of being interviewed by both of you. And obviously I want to wish you best of luck in your career path and continue advocating for young people.
Thank you. We definitely will. And it has been an honor speaking with you, Prime Minister. And to our audience, keep celebrating who you are, speaking up for what is right and the future that we are building. From DMs with PMs, this is Tariq and Shiloh signing off for now. See you next week. Have a good night.